morning. Good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for being here this morning with us on the SonRise Project and our weekly support group call. Once again, as always, I'm so grateful to have you all here in this safe space that we are sharing in the spirit of helping ourselves and helping our children and our families move forward. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Ooh, what a week it has been. And it is such a delight to have back with us this morning Dr. Bernada Baker, who is calling in from California this morning, where it is barely 6 a.m. Pacific time. But she has so graciously blessed us to be back today on this very it's an interesting day. I was going to say traumatic, but it's not traumatic. It's a different day. It's a new day. It's different than what we may have expected this particular Sunday to be like. But let me tell you about Dr. Bernada Baker, and we're going to jump into a conversation that I know I need today. I'm excited to have you here. Dr. Bernada was with us about, I don't know, 8 or 10 weeks ago. She is a community psychologist, motivational and keynote speaker, DE&I champion, pastoral counselor, educator, and author. She is a respected spiritual leader who has served as a chaplain at Emory Hospital and Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. She specializes in fostering community, curating confidence, powering personal development, and dealing with childhood trauma and grief, and also trauma and grief that most of us, if not all of us, felt this week. So I'm looking forward to it again just in a moment. She is a natural overachiever, and she grew up in a very chaotic environment. She has earned her BS in community health. She's got a Master of Divinity, a Master of Public Health, an MBA in Healthcare Administration, and a PhD in community psychology. She has served as a psychology and business professor for 15 years with appointments as a visiting professor at Texas Southern and the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. She's the author of 4 books and the founder of a 501c3 nonprofit organization called the Princess Within Academy, which focuses on leadership development and mentoring for girls in STEAM. And she is the proud mother of a beautiful 7-year-old daughter named Bella Sky, who she was just telling me this morning was on the Jennifer Hudson show and who's done all kinds of amazing things at a whopping 7 years old. So thank you. Thank you for being here with us this morning. I'm really happy you're here, Dr. Bernada.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for the opportunity to join you on this beautiful Sunday morning.
Beautiful Sunday morning. That's
Beautiful Sunday
exactly
morning.
right. And you know what? This is November is National Gratitude Month
Mm-hmm.
and National Family Caregivers
Mm-hmm.
Month. And as I think about those two things, and I think about what happened on Tuesday, I would love to open up on a real simple question around gratitude. And this week, the election results, which were disappointing for most of us as Black women, um, how do we find a space of gratitude still? And how do we move forward in the midst of such pain that many of us felt?
This week again has been a very interesting week, but I do believe in finding joy in all things. And even in the midst of this, there is joy. I live my life by the quote, life is only 10% of what happens to you and 90% of how you respond to it. And so this outcome, the outcome of the election, I am subscribing to my life's quote. Again, it's 10% of what happened to us, and how we respond, our point of view, our perspective on it is 90%. And so the moment of gratitude, the grace for gratitude, if you will, is the fact that we are in a place that we are properly positioned in spaces and with opportunities that, our mothers and grandmothers and our great grandmothers did not have. And so we have what we need, we have what it takes, we have an abundance, access to an abundance of resources, community knowledge, all of the things to make a plan and figure out what it is that we want our next 4 years to look like. if nothing more, nothing less, this is an opportunity for us to gain the clarity that we need in an effort to move forward. Things may not have turned out the way that majority of us anticipated that it would turn out, just as life doesn't always turn out the way that we would have anticipated, right? And so you can find your peace, your PEACE, from broken pieces. Ian Levine Zant's book, Peace from Broken Pieces, is one of my favorite books. I highly recommend and require majority of my clients to work through that book during their time and of healing and work with me. But I think that's a great resource as well, and just a great piece from broken pieces. There are
Mhm.
many fragmented pieces as a result of this election, and they're still gathering many of the broken pieces. And so I think it's a time opportunity for us to really focus on ourselves and our community and figure out what
Mhm.
the work that we need to do individually and collectively so that we can move forward.
Mhm. So how did you work through yourself? What was your um how did you work through your response on Wednesday? And what did you say to your daughter, your 7-year-old?
Like many people, Kelly, I was in disbelief, and it started early, right? We didn't even get
Yeah.
to the very end. It started early. I was like, no
Yes.
way. There is absolutely no way these numbers are coming in like this, right? It is
Right.
too early. And so, just dealing with the initial shock, the initial disappointment, but remembering, I know firsthand what it feels like to be a Black woman, an educated Black woman in America.
Right.
And so when you think about the experiences that we have lived through, the experiences that we have read about, the experience that, we know that our ancestors grew through, um, I don't know that it's so surprising to me. It was so surprising to me. For my 7-year old, she was fully invested in the election. And so I had to pick her up off the ground from crying. And she's like, Mom, I bet my whole life on this. And I'm like, your whole 7 years, right? And so, I mean,
Oh,
she was sobbing, absolutely sobbing. And I was like, it's okay. Like, this is not the end all be all. It's the next 4 years, but let's figure out what we want life to look like for the next four
right.
years. The next day, it was a heavy day, of course. And so,
Mhm.
carrying around the heaviness, I decided to hit the reset button, which meant for me not doing a whole lot. I took myself
Yeah.
out for a nice lunch, I took a nice stroll. I went for read my book, did a little bit of journaling, and
Yes.
sometimes you just got to move forward. And again, I think for many of us who are mothers and women, and the many roles that we play,
Mhm.
this is no different than all of the other life experiences that we've had, where we've had to change our direction, reroute our plans, be strategic about how we're going to move forward and manage our emotions. And so I think you have to figure
Mhm.
out what works best for you and make it happen.
Yes. And I would say what's interesting about what you just said is, picking your daughter up off the floor. I think many of us had to get up off the floor. I, literally and figuratively. And that morning, a divine thing happened. This daily word came through my inbox. It's just a couple short paragraphs, but it was so perfect. I was sitting at the hairdresser at 5 a.m. to get my gray colored cover. And what was so deep is this came in. I wanted to share it. Said it can be unsettling and uncomfortable to live with uncertainty, especially when I may be eager for a resolution to a situation. I
Mm,
remind myself that divine order is always unfolding, often in ways I cannot know and at a pace I cannot control. When I feel the urge to rush a resolution, I step back and remind myself of the presence of God in and through all things. I may recall other times when uncertain situations ultimately resolved. Knowing this, I am assured that whatever is happening now has also come to pass. Affirming divine order keeps me patient and trusting in right outcomes. I do what is mine to do without urgency or worry. I trust in the divine order. And so that to me,
I love that.
me too, my
I
daily
love
word just
that.
popped in my
Yeah.
phone as I was sitting at the hairdresser. And it helped me in that moment of say what Dr. Vicky reminded me of, because I sent a note out to some people and she responded, it was a surprise to us, but not to God. Hashtag divine order. And I love that because it immediately did for me what you just talked about, like looking at what can I do from a
Mhm,
self-care perspective. So one
mhm,
immediate thing was saying, I'm not watching the news anymore because I
mhm,
don't want to see. I don't want to
yeah,
hear about it. I don't want to know about it. I don't want to hear any voices from
mhm,
particular people. That's just
mhm,
going to make me upset. And
mhm,
so I signed up for Hulu, signed up for
mhm.
Netflix,
All
all
right.
these things, and I'm watching some quite disturbing shows, but it at least is a
It's
way.
taking your mind off of what's going on, right, in the political climate.
It is a wonderful departure and an opportunity to catch up on culture, things that are
Mhm,
happening in culture. And
right.
so I just love how you said, Dr. Bernada, looking at ways for self-care. You took a stroll, you took some quality time, pulled your journal out, wrote how you were feeling, and had that conversation with your daughter because I want to double click on that.
Mhm,
Many of the people here have children, and I'll speak from an example. My 19-year-old voted for the first time, was super excited, got
mhm.
asked about
Super
his
excited.
vote afterwards and why he voted for the way he did. And he was talking about reproductive rights and all these things. It
Mhm,
was amazing.
uh-huh,
And so he's super disappointed, but we haven't talked about it.
mhm,
So all he said was, "Oh, I like your hair curly. It's
mhm,
okay, but I like it curly, mom." I said,
mhm.
"Okay." But we didn't. I said, "How are you feeling?" "I'm all right." And I did not take an opportunity to go further. So how
Okay.
would you recommend? Like, do we just keep moving or do we need to have a conversation to close the loop on the election with our children? What do you recommend?
I definitely recommend having a conversation. The world is talking about it, and it's not something that we can ignore. It's happening. It
Yeah.
has happened. Moving forward, all the things will continue to happen. And I think that if we don't have these conversations, if we
Mhm.
as the parents don't ignite the conversation or, I think it's reminiscent of other areas of our lives where we've just kind of swept things underneath the carpet and acted as if it was going to disappear. And as a result, our children end up walking around harboring thoughts and feelings and emotions where, because they didn't have a safe space to really talk about that. And
Mhm.
sometimes we as parents are guilty of not creating that safe space to have those difficult conversations, those critical conversations. And I think for us as parents, sometimes it's easier to just ignore it or
Yeah.
wait on our children to initiate it. No, it's our responsibility to do that because the world may not provide them with a safe space or a platform or the opportunity to engage in conversations about the matters of their hearts. And so I
Yeah.
definitely think you should go back and, pick up on that conversation because there's something there. And I don't know
Right.
about you, but there have been many of times where I've ignored a nudge or a necessary conversation that needed to be had. And so, yeah.
Mm. Okay. Thank you for that. We'll definitely will do that. And I would love for you to just share for a teenager or for a 20-year-old or 30-year-old child,
Mhm.
when the space is available or when you're in the same space, what would the opening line need to be from the parent to the child? How do
You
you
know,
re-engage?
I think it's something simple. Like how is your heart feeling? Like are there any matches of the heart that you have? What are your concerns
And then
about?
when they say fine, fine.
Okay. Okay. And again, you don't have to press them. If they're not ready to have that conversation, that's fine. But at least they won't be able to say that you didn't come back and
Yeah.
have try to have that conversation. So if it's
Okay.
fine, what are your thoughts? How do you feel? And I think,
Yes.
it's easy. Again, we don't want to have the conversation. So of course, if they say fine, we're gonna take it and run with it because you're not ready to have that conversation. I think just like with anything, you can
Okay.
probe a little further. Um,
Yes.
and you don't have to accept fine, you're the parent, right? You can probe a little further and try to engage them, in that
And then let
conversation,
it
but
go, but at
yeah,
least
and then
try to
let
have
it
the
go. But you can
conversation.
you can try it,
I
yeah,
think
like
that's great.
and I think identifying their role in the earth, like, you're a Black male, you're a Black woman,
Mhm.
young woman. How do you feel about this? How has this
Right.
impacted your generation? And maybe not discussing it directly about them, but their generation, like how, what are your friends talking about? How are
Yes.
your friends feeling? Things like that. And so you might want to, approach it from a different angle, but definitely approach it. I think, most times we think it's easier to just avoid it altogether, and ultimately it's not.
And that's such a habit that we have in our community, and I have continued that habit, so I need to really work on that. So thank you for
Awareness is
that.
key.
It's a habit. It's like, any muscle that needs to be exercised, especially when it's difficult,
Yeah.
but we need to do it. We need to lift the weights, exercise the muscle. So thank you for that. I will do that today. Appreciate it. I wanna talk about the the last time you were here, we talked about sacred spaces.
Mhm.
And today, um, our intention is to talk about raising purpose-driven children and staying in a space of gratitude. But I wanted to really talk about the selection situation first. So thank you for obliging on that. Um, what is a purpose-driven child exactly? What does that mean, a purpose-driven child, in your words? So again, last time you defined so beautifully sacred grace. So today, how would you describe a purpose-driven child?
You know what? I don't think there's one definition of a purpose-driven child. I think there are key characteristics of a purpose-driven child. And so raising a child who is has a strong sense of self, who, has their own sense of direction about what they want to do with their life, or, the path they want to take. Of course, life is always unfolding. But just has a reassurance of who they are in the earth, and, just vivacious about whatever path they have selected, and determined to get there. And so sometimes that looks different for each child. But when your child is different. You know when your child is not the average, typical, you know, happy-go-lucky child. You know when there is something that stands out about your child. And so being able to understand and see what the natural eye doesn't see, right? Looking at it from a spiritual perspective and being able to identify those character traits, I believe that is the core of a purpose-driven child. And again, it looks different for every child, so I don't think there's one cookie cutter definition as it relates to a purpose-driven child.
So share how you have managed your daughter. I want to, that I want to make sure that we have people have time to talk about some of the challenges they may be facing. But you mentioned that your daughter was on Jennifer Hudson, the
Mhm.
Jennifer Hudson show. You also mentioned how sad and distraught she was about the election results. How have you instilled this and her desire to be president and all the things? How have you done that with your own child?
I've been very intentional about just the life that I've lived and how I modeled it for her. And I
Hmm.
think a lot of the habits and characteristics that I have, she's just picked up on them innately. But she started
Hmm.
at such an early age. I can remember tying her shoe at the tender age of maybe 2. And I was like, "Come here, girl." And she was like, "Don't call me girl, call me Bella." She couldn't even speak. Her name is Bella. And I have it on video because I had to record
Oh.
everything. And she was serious about it. And early on, I was like, as a parent, you're like, "Are you talking crazy to me?" But
Mhm.
early on, I was like, I can't argue with her. Like, she doesn't want me to call her girl. She wants me to identify her by her name.
Mhm.
Imagine
Mhm.
if we were able to do that at the tender age of
Right,
2, right? 2, 3,
right.
4, 5, 20, 25, and 30. Imagine if we stood
Yes.
tall as it relates to how people respond, refer to us, or
Mhm.
how they categorized us. And so I noticed the behavior early on in life. I noticed
Mhm.
how strong-willed she was, how determined she was, and I just, I picked my battles rather than going against it and trying
Mhm.
to form her into the, perfect little human, idealistic little girl, little
Mhm.
princess,
Mhm.
that I would have had her to be. I just gave her the space and the opportunity to be. And so,
Mhm.
I am the founder of the Princess Within Academy, and so again, everything is all frills, and I'm the queen of
It's
a tutu
lovely.
and a tiara. My daughter could care less about having anything to do with a tiara and a tutu, right?
I love
For
it.
Halloween, I wish she would, dress up as a baby doll, as a something, a princess, something. She wants to dress up as Black Panther, Spider-Man,
Love it.
all of the things that
Yes.
are opposite
Mhm.
from what I would choose for her. And so, again, I think just providing the platform and the space for the children to be free, free to explore, free to grow, free to cultivate their own character and their own personality at their own will within reason, right?
Mhm.
So we definitely want to keep some kind of confines on them, but giving them a space to be. I don't know about you all, but I grew up with people telling me what I needed to do. I grew up being told
Mhm.
what I needed to become and how I needed to live
That's right.
and all of the things rather than being given the ingredients to make those things happen. For those of
Mhm.
us who were raised in church, religion was beat over into my head, into,
Yeah.
every aspect of my being to a point where m- myself, along with many others, were traumatized as a result
Mhm.
of our church, our religious experiences, if you
Right.
will. And so, again, I think just being clear about the differences in the way you were raised and the manner in which you were raising your children is important.
And how do you get back, like backtrack if you have grown children? And how do you start over with your children? That's the challenge that I think many of us on this call are facing with maybe teenage children or adult children that are on their own path. And we're trying really hard to let them walk their own path. And yet, um, there might be learned helplessness because we've done everything for them their whole lives. They don't know how to do anything for themselves. Or it could be that they're doing things that we don't approve of,
Right.
or it could be a mixture. How do you, I mean, what guidance can you give a parent who is so diligently trying to work with their child or get them off the couch or get them out of the bedroom when you know they're depressed? You
Well,
know,
I'm
mhm.
sorry. I
No,
think
no,
going
go
back
ahead.
to that sacred grace,
Yes.
giving yourself some sacred grace, a dosage of sacred grace, not every day, but by the hour. As we know, being a parent is difficult, especially when you raise children up in privileged environments and provided them with an overabundance of everything
Mm,
that they needed and more, right? And
yeah.
so I think going back to the foundation of your why do we do the things that we do? Why are we
Mm,
these types of parents? Why, have we masqueraded around, doing things that we weren't necessarily happy with? And so I think before we can identify why our children are operating in the capacity that they're operating, we as the parents have to go back and really um, acknowledge our shortcomings and the areas
mhm.
where, we've continued or carried out pathologies that we weren't really pleased with. We were just doing things that had been taught and passed down to us. And so I think that's number one.
Yes, that is good. Looking at why we're doing what we're doing and why some of these things have been passed down, and then starting there and
Hmm.
trying to change those things, correct?
Yeah. Yes,
Okay. That's
definitely.
interesting. And you mentioned Sacred Grace again. Can you refresh for people who weren't here back in August? There might be some new people or people that don't remember all those wonderful tidbits that you gave us because it was all about how do we create sacred grace and refill our cups, and focusing on ourselves.
Sacred grace is something that I think that we don't, especially as women, especially as mothers, that we don't extend we don't extend the olive branch enough to ourselves. We are afraid. If you're anything like me, I'm guilty. Guilty is charged. I am guilty of tending to everybody else and showing up for everybody else and making sure that everybody else's needs are met and neglecting myself in some aspects of life just because we've been accustomed to doing that, right? For many of us, it comes natural. So natural that when you're not doing it, when you decide to take a different stand, you feel like you're doing something wrong, right?
Yes.
Sacred grace provides you with the opportunity for you to be selfish about what it is that you need. And it
Mm,
provides you with the space and the opportunity for you to seek out what you need unapologetically. And I think
yes.
that, if we as mothers, women, caretakers, parents, if we did a better job of extending ourselves sacred grace, we could do a better job of extending sacred grace to others. Oftentimes, we want
Mm,
to project. and hope for the best for our children when we're not really giving ourselves the best.
Mm.
You're not you want our we want our children to make the highest decisions, right? And
Yes.
operate at the optimum level of their potential and all of the things. And most times we're not doing that. And so if you're not being an
Mm,
exemplary model of what you're expecting for your children, then we're living a lie. And I think
mm,
again we talked in the last time about just our decorated careers and the neighborhoods that we live in and all the
mhm,
things that we can go and purchase. But sacred grace is something that money can't buy. Sacred grace is
mm,
something that your association, your affiliation, your
mm.
status, your job title, it can't buy.
That's right.
Uh, and so you have to create that sacred grace. You have to discover what sacred grace looks like for you because,
Mhm,
again, there's not a cookie cutter definition for that because sacred grace for me might be something totally different for you. And so
mm.
identifying what you need, identifying the areas in which you are deficit, where you need to be replenished, the areas where you need to grow, where you can improve in, identifying your strengths and the areas, the core foundations that you would like to build on. But again, that requires for us to do self reflection, to be
Yeah.
more self aware. And then and only then can we extend ourselves that sacred grace.
And that is work, self-reflection and getting quiet with ourselves and really when the word truth, telling ourselves the truth
Yeah,
about what really is happening versus the story that we've made up about what happened. Really just telling the truth is hard work for
it's
most
hard
of
work.
us.
And
Mm.
it's not only HARD, it's HEART work. And
Yes,
so, yeah, it's that hard work. It is the work that you would much rather prefer not to do. It is the work that you would, it's so much easier to run away from it, to get busy doing everything else. It's hard work. It is heart, HEART, and hard work,
yes,
HARD, because before it gets better, it's probably gonna get worse, right? Because once you
absolutely.
go in and pull back the layers and clean out the infection of the pathologies that you've carried for so
Mhm.
long, you got to really get in there and clean it out. And so, um, yeah, it's hard work.
It's like anything. It's like having children, the pain, and then it's like, "Oh, here's the baby." Or, it's like like you just said, it's like cleaning out an infection. You might have surgery to do that. There might be some pain, but once you're on the other side of that, you're feeling better, the infection's gone, hopefully, prayerfully, all of that. So that's really powerful. It's hard work and heart work. And sacred grace is heart work. I'm reading a note in the chat. There is a question that says for an adult child who says they don't know who they are and they have no purpose, how do you help redirect them? An
I definitely
adult
think
child. Mhm.
I think it's important. Of course, I'm an advocate of therapy. Being a psychologist, I am pro therapy. And I think we all need to be in therapy on a regular basis and not just because something traumatic has happened, but because it provides a safe space for you to be able to process what it is that you are growing through. So I definitely think tapping into those resources as it relates to um, a counselor, therapist, a pastoral support system, some kind of mentor. Oftentimes, it's hard for our children to receive and to hear what it is that we're saying. And so, getting them to, talk to somebody else, to open up to someone else, and just getting to the core of why they feel the way that they feel. I think identifying those resources that are outside of the household, that are not you, a non-judgmental third party, if you will, because if your child comes to you and tells you, "I don't know my purpose, I don't know why I'm here," you are too emotionally attached to that, right? And
Right.
so you're going into all your feelings about what you done wrong and all of the things, and
Mhm.
you don't have the answers. And sometimes we have to be willing to reach out to the community and to our resources and to tap into our resources without being ashamed,
Right.
after you poured your all into your child and provided them with everything for them to get to a place in their life where they're like, I don't know what I'm doing. Well, if you've done everything for them, how would they know what they're doing,
Exactly.
right? And so I think placing them with someone or partnering them with someone who can help them map out a blueprint to discover why they're feeling what they're feeling is important. And often, and
Yes,
we're not required to do it all. You don't have to have all the answers for your children. You provide the foundation and then you tap into the resources. But oftentimes as parents, we don't want to tap into the resources because if our children do the work, that might result in them coming back to us and asking us questions about some of the work that
right,
we may have not done. And so
right.
being willing to take that journey with them and to take a deeper dive by getting them the resources that they need outside of ourselves.
I love that. And a couple builds on what you're saying. I think that as absolutely true. And I've noticed with my eldest, with Kyle, he meets with a man named Dr. Halim Ali, who runs a foundation in Colorado where he lives. And he also, and he, the communication and the connection between the two of them is not as like a therapist,
Mhm,
client type of thing. They meet for lunch, they'll
mhm,
go to a game or something. And it's been so extraordinarily helpful. They're still, two steps forward, one step back, maybe
mhm,
three steps back sometimes, but that has been helpful having an outside person be a
mhm,
resource. And I wanted to just say also for our Sunrise community, we do have two additional spaces that our children or your children can call into. One is for women 18 and over, that Dr. Vicki Johnson hosts on the third Wednesday of the month. And then Brothers Unfiltered is the third Thursday of the month. That's for men 18 and up. But I'm going to put both of the links. Those are free also support group calls. But Dr. Halim Ali, the man that's been working with my eldest, hosts that call. And from what I've heard, it's men only, 18 and up. But what I've heard is it's been extraordinarily powerful every month. And it's a safe space like this for
mhm,
parents, but it's a safe space. So our young people, so you might want to suggest or maybe provide a link and say, none of us are on those calls necessarily. We might be if we want to have additional support on the woman's call or the men's call, but it won't be like your son or daughter feels like they're being spied upon. We don't record the conversations. It is a private conversation. You have to register for it. And so, but that's it. So those are two resources that are available now. I'll put both of those in the link. And then there are others as well. They're online at drbernadabaker.com. She's a resource as well and is taking new patients, new clients also, and is phenomenal. Do you have other resources you would want to share here for people who might be looking for
mhm.
support?
It just depends on what you're looking for. If somebody wants to reach out to me for me to further explore, I'm willing to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. Awesome. I want to make sure that we have an opportunity for people to ask their questions directly this morning. And I'm also looking to see if there's some additional, I felt like I saw another comment down
I
here.
wanted to also throw out a question
Yeah.
as it relates to just this whole parenting purposefully. I think it's also important for us as parents, as mothers, to just to identify and further investigate what our unwritten parenting blueprint is. Because again, I don't know about you, but when I became a parent, I had 59 degrees and a wealth of experience under my belt, but nobody passed me a blueprint for how to get this thing done. And so maybe some of you all were blessed enough to have a blueprint passed on to you. And so there are some things that I've learned along the way. And there are some things that if I had an opportunity to go back and do it again, I probably would have did some things differently. And so I think acknowledging our unwritten parents and blueprint and acknowledging there were some things that I probably should have done different and taking ownership. You can't really help your child until you are willing to sit in those uncomfortable spaces with some of the choices, some of the decisions that you made, some of the actions that you took, some of the conversations that you avoided having, some of the, situations that you walked through or that you stayed in as it related to, what you thought was the best thing as it related to parenting. And so I don't think that there's anything per se that I don't think I don't think there's such thing as fixing what you could have done wrong. I do think that there is an opportunity for you to edit or revise or in addition add on to, some of the things that has been done. And but I think acknowledgement is important. If what I can't speak for anybody else, but if my parents came to me and said, "Hey, we dropped the ball on a number of
Mhm.
things where you were concerned," that conversation alone would provide me with the freedom, if you will,
Mhm.
to really tap into my inner healing as a child and to I just address the trauma, right? We don't want to address
Right.
the trauma. Your degrees, your income, your associations, your affiliations, the neighborhood you live in, those things will not address your own trauma. And
That's
oftentimes, as
right.
parents, we're working to try to help our children heal through their trauma when we as the adults have not healed through our own trauma. So the more you sit with self, the more healthy you are to sit with others. Um,
And acknowledging it and apologizing, right?
and apologizing. Yeah,
That's it, because it's not just acknowledgement. I mean, I think that's a big, huge part of it because most of
it
us don't even do that part. But then the second part is verbally apologizing
is.
and out loud saying it and making sure it's heard and felt, right? That's equally important. Do you agree? The
Equally. I,
apology?
I totally agree.
Mhm.
Yeah,
But
so
do
I
you
think take
oh,
oh, go
go
ahead, I'm
ahead.
sorry.
No, yes, there was a woman said, "How can we fix the things that we would have done differently?" I think you've addressed that
I
for the
did,
most
I saw the
part.
question come in.
Yeah, okay,
It was
okay.
Leslie.
It's the acknowledgement and the apology because you can't get the time back.
No, you can't get the time back, and there are no regrets. Like, I don't believe in living life with regrets. I believe
Mm,
in lessons learned, opportunities that have been experienced, and this journey is full of adventures. And so whatever adventures life has taken you on, and the decisions that you've made, whichever bumps on the roller coaster ride that you've had, it's an opportunity for you can't go back and reclaim that time, but you can move forward and do something different. And I think having these conversations with our children is important. Like, look, I was
yes.
doing the best that I thought I knew how to do. Who did it for you? When we think about what we're passing
Mm,
down generationally, you know, we have more resources than our parents. Some of us have more resources than our parents and our grandparents did. And so, how
yes.
are we using those? And when I talk about resources, I'm not just talking about the monetary aspect. We have more knowledge and more wherewithal to do things differently, right? We have
Mhm,
access to being healthier, to operating at the highest
mhm,
level of our emotional well-being. But if we're not taking advantage of those resources, then we're not being good stewards over our resources. And so it's so much more than the financial aspect and the things that we can buy.
mm. Is all kinds of a word for me this morning because, I can't get the time back, but I can choose to create a different type of relationship and a different type of space for my children and
And
for
it's hard. It's hard. I have quite a few clients right
Mhm,
now who are high profile, high functioning women who have raised these children who are privileged,
mhm,
who have been crippled in some aspects and who are having a hard time moving forward. And it's hard dealing with your own mom guilt about taking a stand
mhm,
and removing the
mm,
children off the pedestal that they've been placed upon their whole life, and doing something different. And so we want our children to be people that we have not always been willing to be. And so I think the
mm,
level of expectation, you have to be true to yourself before, you can be true to somebody else. And sometimes our expectations for what we want to see in our children, um, we're not holding ourselves to that higher standard. And so you will not be able to get the results that you're looking for in somebody else until you produce those results within yourself.
mm. I just one funny story about that that's a little funny, and then I see a hand up and I see a question in the chat.
Okay.
But I used to be my one of my sons, the little one, used to be late all the time.
Uh
5
huh.
minutes late, 10 minutes late, 20 minutes, whatever, just late every day to
Uh huh.
school, to practice, to everything. And I would be so upset about it. Just like, we can't be late, we can't be late. And somebody asked me, "Well, are you always on time?" And it hit me like, I'm always even this call starts at 9:03 every week. 9:02, 9:03, 9:04, not right at 9. So what you just said hit me so clearly because I have my own interesting relationship with time.
Mhm. Mhm.
that I need to address,
Mhm.
which is what used to make me so upset about the little one. Like until I got to the place where I was like, who cares if he's late? I don't like whatever.
Right, right, right.
It is what it is. We're gonna get there. Now he's not never late. Like never. But I want to, so that's just a funny story because I have to focus on my own self. What we
Yeah,
don't like
you
in
do.
others is typically the issue with that we have with ourselves. One of the
Mhm.
many things, you know, one of our issues. We see it in our children. It's like we need to focus on that ourselves. There's a question and then a hand up, but the
Okay.
question popped in first. It says, how do you create that different space if your children don't allow you? My son can be resistant and defiant at every turn.
And I think that you have to give them space. Again, nobody wants to be cornered, forced into doing something. And so you have to know the child that you're dealing with. You know your child, you know their temperament, you know whether or not they're going to, if you move forward, if they're going to come towards you or if they're going to run
Mhm,
away. And so I
mhm,
think, again, providing that space and giving them time to get to that place that you're hoping that and again, tapping into resources. If they don't want to talk to you, make sure that they're talking to somebody.
mhm.
And so, and giving it time, Rome wasn't built overnight, and your children did not grow up to be these adults. This just didn't happen today, right? And
Right.
so you're dealing with many layers, many years of baggage and issues and challenges that has been faced. And so, given, it's not going to happen overnight. And if they're not willing to create that space with you, partner them with somebody that they might be willing to partner journey with in order to do the work. And timing is everything. Oftentimes we're looking for it to happen in our timing. It might not happen in our timing. I know that when I'm
Mm.
speaking out, sometimes my daughter says, "Mommy, trust the process." Now, look,
Your
I'm
seven-year-old.
I'm a PhD around here, right? And I have a 7-year-old telling me to trust the process.
That's deep.
And so I encourage you to trust the process because
Yes.
oftentimes the process, when you're ready to take the cake out of the oven, sometimes the cake still needs to bake. And so,
Mm. I love that. It's like their time is maybe not our time. And yeah, it's always a higher power's time. And it's not ours. Were you about to say something, Dr. Bernita?
I was just going to say, I think that it's important for us as parents to examine your responses and your actions. If you are
Mm,
trying to get your adult child to a space and a place, sometimes we just have to take our hands off, right? Sometimes we have to agree quickly with God and just let His will be done. And sometimes you have to be the one that's resistant to the fight, right? I'm not fighting with you. When you're ready to do the work, I'm here to help you do the work. And so, why is it triggering you so
mm,
much? Like, what is it? What's going on? What is it not happening quick enough? Is it not? What's the deadline that you have for this healing to take process?
mhm,
And
mhm.
then you have to remember also that although these children are adult children, oftentimes your 20-year-old is really that 13-year-old because that's when the traumatic experience may have happened. And so emotionally, they may be stunted at their age. And so you're looking at this child with the age that they are, but you're not looking at where they might be emotionally. And so
Mhm,
identifying what is triggering you. And then what exacerbates you. Like what is driving you, up the wall? Why and why? I always go back to your why. Why are you
yes,
so flustered about this? And what was the buildup to get here? Because again, you didn't get so
right.
frustrated overnight. And so again,
Exactly.
we got to go back and do that work. Yeah.
Mm,
And so
so
we have
deep.
to take a depth of insight into ourselves as parents before we can really take a deep dive into these children.
Absolutely. And I want to make sure that I see Jules has her hand up. Jules,
Hi,
good morning.
good morning. It's really funny what you just said. Well, I
Mm,
raised my hand a little bit before the last question, but something interesting has happened. I've raised three young men, 35, 28, 24. And
Congratulations.
thank you. And with the 35-year-old, he was very non-confrontational, said yes to everything, very obedient, or so I thought. But in hindsight, we talk about it. He's just like, well, he could just read me very well and he would be agreeable. He didn't always do what I said, but he definitely was never going to be disagreeable, had great manners. And he just explained, he said, in other words, sometimes when you were tripping, I knew you were tripping. So I just ignored it and made you feel good. And I'm like, okay, that was one. The 28-year-old, I learned not until he was in seventh grade, instead of saying, what are you doing? To start to ask, what were you thinking? Help me understand your thinking, like for your process, and not reacting as much in anger when he did things I just did not understand, but start to ask him, what was he thinking, to understand how he was reacting to things. And I did okay in that area, but then because I started learning that he really thought differently, but it was also beginning to help me see when he started to have some mental wellness challenges and how the thinking was. So that was a part that was growing me. And with the second child is when I started going to therapy more so myself. But then what a funny thing has happened with the 24-year-old. The 24-year-old now, he asked me, well, what are you thinking? Like, how you get to this emotion? Like, what? And he started asking me, I see you're upset. What's going on with you? And this child has been in therapy in and out most of his young years. I got him started in therapy earlier. I mean, the reason for the therapy ended up being that I was going through a divorce, but what has I've learned about myself has helped me understand things so better. It makes me see my role in it, and it starts having me identify when I am triggered or what's annoying. And unfortunately or fortunately, a lot of the things and behaviors that I was doing is because of my upbringing or what I thought it should be because of whatever reasoning it was. Sometimes it was legitimate and I couldn't articulate it through my anger in a way that could have been received in a better way. And sometimes it was, you know what, I'm having a reaction and it really isn't matching whatever it occurred. And the irony is I could see it so clearly when I deal with others and staff, and but when it came to that self-reflection, that parenting, the fact that they all react to things differently has been just life-changing. And so now that I am a grandmother, it and I'm talking to that oldest child who is always like, okay, now I need to know you're thinking. Back then, I just kind of went with the flow and ignored some of the things that you were doing, so I wouldn't have a conflict. But now he's calling and saying, okay, I'm feeling this way. Walk me through it so I could be a better parent. So I just put that out there because that goes right back to what you were saying regarding the work that you have to do, me, the parent, has to do in order to improve all of the relations. And even though the one child is experiencing mental wellness issues that we've gone through a lot and are still going through, it was identified a little bit more because we were having the conversations of what was the thinking. And that's when I was noticing the thinking wasn't making as much sense. But I'm not sure per se that if the oldest child had that, I would have known. I don't think I would have known to that degree. I think it would have taken a longer time. So I just wanted to put that out there because it felt in line with what you were saying. And I just wanted to, it's still hard because you're still in different roles, trying to be a good parent and trying to be a better person. And so it's a tremendous, nauseating amount of unlearning that is just so much. So I just put that out there.
Those were such great examples. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm just reminded of how each child can have a different experience with the parents, right? And each child is different. But also, what I love about your youngest child is that, he's tapped into what's going on in the world today. Look, we have men going to therapy, we have men talking about emotional and mental health, things that we didn't have, many, many years ago. And so we've just hit a different space in the world that has normalized conversations about emotional health. And so, I'm grateful for that. And I think for your oldest, just being able to be present with him and again, encouraging him to find a therapist, somebody that he can walk with. Because oftentimes, when these children go away to college and they get these degrees and they're doing what they were supposed to do, what we've molded them to do, there is so many things that are trapped in their heart, right? In their heart, so many things they're trying to unravel in their mind, just a sense of self and discovering really the core of who they are, aside from the vision of who their parents, expected them to become, and then just their own internal challenges. I think there's so much that goes into that. So allowing them the space and the opportunity to get to that place. But as long as we all individually and collectively continue doing our healing, again, it is not a destination. It is a continuous journey that will forever be unfolding, and one that will be that should be curated, until the day you take your last breath.
And I also want to add that some things that we discovered that I did not think about that, which is the kids don't remember things the way you remember them.
Um,
And that is like something they would say, when you did this, what was happening here? And I thought it was either obvious or like,
right.
oh, like, what are you talking about? And they were just like, oh no, we just thought you were straight tripping. We didn't know why. We didn't understand this was going on, and you remember that they're not always privy of, and you were, and at the time I'm thinking, oh, of course they weren't privy because those were behind the closed door conversations. And so I didn't want to expose them to blah, blah, blah. And then, but then how it hit them is very different. So having these conversations now gives an opportunity for me to, number one, apologize and explain, and then thinking about what I would do differently. And these are conversations that I find quite annoying, but necessary, if I'm honest. And you have to like take a deep breath. And so I think initially, when I first started having therapy, I was just defensive. Your daddy was tripping. I don't know what you're talking about. Blah, 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 blah. Right. But then it became, okay, this is what I was feeling at that time, and understanding that they didn't know that. So a lot of those conversations are actually necessary. And that's the growing up part, that harder part that I was putting out there.
That's good. One thing that I shared in the chat is what happens when our best is not good enough. And even for those of us who have done our best, sometimes our best was not what our children needed. And so you have to be willing to extend that sacred grace to yourself and accept the fact that there were some things that, probably should have been done differently, but they weren't. And so how do we pick up those pieces and move forward? How do we recover? How do we, write the next best-selling novel on this journey of life together, individually and collectively? And I think it's a matter of acknowledging that we are also on this journey with our children, that they're not doing their work alone, but that we are tapped into this, as well. And I think talking to them and not, at them, and not having to be the authority, and then being transparent and vulnerable enough to share our own lived experiences, right? With my clients, I have them write 3 sentences that sums up their life story. And so sometimes people will write, things about what they've accomplished and this, that, and the other, rather than really going to the core of who they are and how they got to this place. And oftentimes it's hard for us to be vulnerable with others because we don't really want to tap into that place of vulnerability with ourselves. And so I've learned and I found it to be, helpful when we can acknowledge that our biggest the biggest challenge on this journey of parenting and providing the support and the resources is sometimes making sure that we get what we need so that our cups are filled so that we can be better support for our children.
And that part is the hard part, getting what we need in the midst of everything else that's going on, having to, work and people on here that are surgeons that I remember mentioning, we all have so much going on. So taking that time and then being vulnerable is
Yeah,
really hard for most of us.
yeah.
Um, but all of this, and I love what you've put in the chat. So thank you for sharing all these gems. Peel back your own shame
Well,
and hurt from the experiences of life so that you can see with a different eye the inner workings of what is happening. That is fabulous. Um, I also love, it says you are overstimulated as a parent and oftentimes are not as present as you could be due to having to navigate life amidst the chaos. And yes, that part, what I mean? I told the story a couple weeks ago about how one of my sons is at Howard now, and so he pops over frequently. And I had planned on going somewhere with a girlfriend that night. And in that moment, texted my girlfriend and said, Chris is here and I'm going to need to be here. Even though I wanted to do what we had planned, but in that moment, I was like, this is so deep. He's never wanted to just lay up next to me and whatever was going on, he just needed to be nearby, I think. And that was such a powerful, small thing, but huge just to be there in the moment. And it was filling my cup while it was filling his, even though it
I
didn't
love
feel
that.
like that.
I love that. And it's small decisions like that that make a world
Mhm.
of a difference.
Yes.
One thing I'm realizing with my daughter, I'm not really touchy-feely, and she's not either. And so now I've started being a lot more touchy-feely with her, tickling and hugs and kisses. And she's
Mhm.
like, oh, like a giddy little girl. Well, I realized that because I wasn't being, touched on and hugged and kisses and, all of that, that I wasn't giving it to her. And
Yeah.
so it's amazing, like those little small things. It's like, oh, let me shift this or let me do something different. And it's simple adjustments, right?
Right.
It's simple adjustments when you have to adjust your makeup or like you just went and applied your bronzer, right,
I was like,
Kelly?
"Oh gosh, I needed my
You
tan
need
back."
it.
Right?
Like we don't realize. I didn't realize that
Mhm.
the aspect of touch that was a
Yes.
deficit for me, so I wasn't providing it for her. I'm providing everything else, right? But I don't want her
Yes.
to grow up and be one that is, not in tune with the power of touch. And so,
Oh, that's good.
it's just little small things that we can do. And so again, I want to encourage you all, and I
Love
can't
that.
emphasize this enough, to be great, to provide yourself with sacred space and grace to peel back the
Mhm.
layers and
Yeah.
to be okay with some of the things that you didn't may not have gotten right. Be okay with doing your best and
Yes.
not having an ideal blueprint. Be okay with debunking the myths of what you could have done, right? You
That's
did the
right.
best that you knew how to do, and what are we working towards doing in the future? And
From
that's
this point
yeah.
forward, right. Every day is a new opportunity.
And I think we can relate that to the election. What are we doing to
That's
move
right.
forward? What are you doing
Whatever
to move
that
forward?
part.
Yeah, and so not placing it on somebody else, but really bringing it back into our own wheelhouse and coming up with a strategy of,
Yes.
how we're going to move forward.
It's the acceptance. That's why the serenity prayer is so powerful. It's the acceptance and then courage to move forward and then having the wisdom to know it's 4 years, it's going to pass.
Yeah, and surrendering to the process because
That's
there
it.
are just some things that are beyond our control. And so
Mhm.
you don't have to spend a whole lot of time vacillating on what would have happened or what could have, should have happened.
That's right.
You can spend the time moving forward and making what you desire to happen
That's right.
happen.
That's it. Well, thank you, Dr. Bernita, for being here. You are a blessing on so many levels all the time. Thank you for being here. I want to just say to everybody that's here, there are a few links in the chat. If you are not on your computer, you can go to the sonriseproject.com and see all of those for the support groups that I mentioned for Black women and for Black men, and also for our women in DC, our SonRise family, we're having a DC gathering, just some good, fun, joyful experiences for the weekend. Not sitting in a conference room, but, a sip and paint type of thing, a couple of meals, a couple of gatherings. We are inviting you to come join us, and that link is in there as well. And so with all of that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Vicki Johnson, who will close us out this morning. And thank you again, Dr. Bernada, for being here.
Thank you. Blessings.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bernada Baker. And SonRise family, welcome to my world. I work with Dr. Baker. She's walked me through a lot of my own work that I need to do. So I highly recommend her if you're looking for a safe space. She is amazing. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Dee, for creating this space, as well as Sisters and Brothers Unfiltered and the women of SonRise DC. And we're going to be taking that on the road around the country soon. But this was just amazing. Thank you again, Dr. Baker, for being here in the sacrifice. We know you're on the West Coast, and it's like just barely 7 a.m. or a little after over there. So thank you for being here, God. We thank you for this day. We thank you for sacred grace today. Help us to bask in that liminal space of sacred grace today. First with ourselves, then with our children, and then with others as we move through this day, this time, this season, this post-election energy. Help us to rest. Help us to reflect. Help us to reframe and reorder where necessary. Help us to move through this day, again, with sacred grace, and then tomorrow, and then the next day. Thank you for grace and the mind to just do the next thing as we fill our cups, so that at the appointed time, we will be ready to resume our work, our lives, our purpose, our assignment. Thank you for purpose-driven children. Thank you for the wisdom that you give to us to parent them, to guide them, to lead them, and to accept them ultimately, so that we can love them the way you love us. Now bless us as we go further into this day. Keep us safe and bring us back together again on next Sunday for this powerful community, as you pour wisdom into us, so that we can be lighthouses in the world, in our spheres of influence. We give you glory for all of these things. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you again, Dr. Baker.
Thank you all so much.
Absolutely.
Take
Thank
care.
you. Take care. Have a beautiful day. Thank you, Dr. Vicki, as well.